Yeah, speaking of liberal blood on their hands, right? We're just talking about their relationship with First Nations people. So the World Socialist website has released an article saying Canada's Liberal government eliminates all pandemic support for workers amid country's fourth wave. I have noticed that our media is simply not talking about the fact that these benefits have been cut. They're simply not discussing it. I don't see articles in the National Post, the Globe and Mail. I don't see the mainstream media really chatting about it at all. Certainly not with the strong language that comes out of this article. So I'm going to be reading this in full because I think it's very important that people understand what is happening and the desperately horrible decision that this is. And ultimately, my question has become: where are the NDP? Why are the NDP being silent on this? Where is Jagmeet Singh, who was promising, oh, I'm not going to allow the Liberals to do anything to harm people? Well, guess what? Cutting pandemic support services, cutting benefits, even forget about the pandemic angle, right? Homelessness is a crisis, right? People getting thrown out onto the streets is a crisis. We should have support systems to help people to ensure that these outcomes don't occur at all. And where are the NDP? They're just standing by and watching it happen. So here's an article, World Socialist website, from Roger Jordan. Canada's Liberal government eliminates all pandemic support for workers amid country's fourth wave. Canada's Liberal minority government has effectively eliminated all emergency pandemic financial support for unemployed workers with the aim of enforcing big businesses' drive to increase economic output and profits amid the country's fourth wave of COVID-19 infections and deaths. The more than 800,000 workers who have been receiving the Canada Recovery Benefit, which paid up to $400 a week to those who are either jobless or with sharply reduced working hours, have had the rug pulled out from under them. Many are now threatened with destitution, even hunger, and homelessness. Flanked by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland told a press conference last Thursday that the CRB would not be further extended. Consequently, last week is the final week for which CRB payments will be made. This callous decision will impact those ineligible for employment insurance. That is, largely younger workers and those who were employed in the so-called gig economy. Freeland announced the CRB would be replaced by a new benefit, but this is nothing more than a sham. The new benefit has been expressly designed to make it all but impossible for jobless or underemployed workers to obtain a single cent in future government assistance, even as the COVID-19 pandemic rages across the country. For her part, Freeland said the goal of the changes is to make government support more narrow, more targeted, and less expensive. The Liberals' Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit will provide a meager $300 per week and only to workers who cannot go to work during a provincially ordered pandemic lockdown. Under these terms, none of the more than 800,000 people receiving CRB benefits last week will be eligible for the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit once weeks hence. It gets parliamentary sanction. Nor would they or any worker likely ever be eligible, since the provincial governments have uniformly vowed not to reimpose lockdowns, no matter how high COVID-19 infections and deaths rise. In comments to CTV News, Employment Minister Carla Qualtrough emphasized that workers would only be eligible for the benefit under a complete lockdown. Anyone losing their job due to the tightening of public health restrictions short of a complete lockdown will get nothing. Although Canada continues to record almost 3,000 new infections per day, and almost 2,000 people have died of COVID since September 1st, governments across the country are once again rushing to remove any and all public health restrictions as they double down on the ruling class homicidal live with the virus strategy. Yesterday, John Horgan's trade union-backed New Democratic Party government in BC and Doug Ford's hard-right Conservative government in Ontario lifted virtually all capacity restrictions in indoor settings. In announcing its latest rollback of COVID restrictions, the Ontario government stressed its aims to continue aggressively removing public health measures, with all of them, including mask mandates, ended by March 2022. Ford's plans to abolish all COVID restrictions seem to complement what is occurring federally, i.e., both underpin the corporate drive to churn out bigger profits. Observed an Ottawa Citizen editorial Saturday. Now that the federal government is ending COVID relief programs such as the Canada Recovery Benefit, the Citizen continued, it is possible more people who depend on such subsidies will seek work. As Ontario loosens restrictions on small business, demand for employees will rise. All of this, presumably, will be good for the economy. The criminal character of the ruling elite's drive to deprive workers of any financial support and to force them to accept dangerous, low-paid jobs where they will face a high risk of infecting themselves and their loved ones is underscored by the ongoing progression of the pandemic. One day prior to Freeland's announcement, Saskatchewan's Chief Medical Health Officer, Dr. Saqib Shahab, broke down in tears as he informed the province's residents that his agency's modeling shows that the number of intensive care patients infected with COVID-19 could more than double by the new year. Saskatchewan is already sending patients to Ontario due to a lack of healthcare staff and beds. In neighboring Alberta, where some hospitals were forced to deny care to patients deemed least likely to survive over recent weeks, the COVID-19 fatality rate is 3 times higher than for the rest of Canada. According to Worldometers, 765 people are currently in critical condition across the country, and the death toll reached 28,750 Monday. Corporate Canada and its political representatives are positively reveling in this mass death, applauding the Liberal government for scrapping the last vestiges of financial support for workers. Big business had long complained that the CRB was overly generous and blamed it for the staff shortages, especially in the low-wage restaurant, hospitality, and retail sectors. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce declared Freeland's announcement the fair thing to do for business. It praised the fact that while financial support for workers were effectively removed, companies that hire new employees can continue to receive a subsidy worth 50% of their salary costs until May 2022. The official opposition Conservatives, who have long echoed business complaints about the CRB, were likewise full of praise. The Prime Minister followed party leader Erin O'Toole's fiscal plan and announced that the CRB would be ending, said Tory finance critic Ed Fast, before going on to demand that Trudeau halt his government's out-of-control spending. The reality is that the big business Liberals, together with their allies in the trade unions and NDP, have been working throughout the pandemic to protect the interests of big business at the expense of the working class. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CRB's predecessor, extended a pittance of $500 per week to workers laid off following the outbreak of the pandemic. This program, touted as generous by NDP leader Jagmeet Singh and Canadian Labour Congress head Hassan Yousaf, was a drop in the bucket compared to the more than $650 billion forked over to the banks and big business by the Trudeau Liberal government in March 2020. This unprecedented bailout of Canada's financial oligarchy led to the accumulation of fabulous quantities of wealth, with the country's super-rich billionaires becoming $78 billion richer during the pandemic's first year. Last fall, the Trudeau government took the first step in scrapping financial support for workers by replacing the CERB with the CRB. Initially, the government's planned to accompany this change by slashing benefit payments from the already inadequate $500 per week to just $400. However, faced with the rapidly accelerating second wave of the pandemic, which was the product of the reopening of the economy and schools pursued by all provincial governments and overseen by Trudeau, the Liberals backtracked and maintained the $500 a week payments until the spring. In their 2021 budget, they cut CRB payments to $400 per week, a move which secured the needed majority parliamentary support thanks to the votes of the New Democrats. No such fiscal prudence, to use Freeland's corporate jargon, is exercised when dealing with Canada's wealthy elite. The Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, which also expired last weekend, was a massive corporate slush fund that paid for bumper shareholder payouts and lavish executive salaries at many of the country's leading businesses. There is also nothing new in Trudeau's partnership with hard-right provincial governments in implementing the ruling elite's murderous open economy/open schools policy. In its September 2020 throne speech, which passed with NDP support, the Trudeau government called for any future anti-COVID lockdowns to be adopted at the local level and on a short-term basis. This gave the likes of Quebec's herd immunity promoting Premier François Legault and Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, who was describing COVID-19 as a flu as late as June 2020, a free hand to pursue a policy of mass infection and death. In early July 2021, when Kenney declared that Alberta was open for summer and eliminated almost all public health measures, Trudeau and his Liberal government said and did nothing. Over 2 months later, when Alberta's ICUs were already full to the brim with seriously ill patients, the Prime Minister cynically seized on Kenney's reckless reopening strategy to attack the federal Conservatives in the final days of the federal election campaign. The scraping of what little remained in the way of financial support for Canadian workers marks a further stage in the intimate collaboration between all Canada's parliamentary parties in enforcing the interests of the ruling elite during the pandemic. It and the recent joint US-Canadian naval provocation against China in the Taiwan Strait provide a foretaste of how ruthless the incoming Liberal minority government will be in attacking the rights and living standards of working people and in pursuing an aggressive foreign policy aimed at upholding the global interests of Canadian imperialism. Today, Trudeau is to announce the cabinet for his third term in office. Business lobby groups and media commentators have been clamoring for months about the need to make Canada more competitive and ready to take advantage of the economic recovery. Code words for forcing workers to accept brutal exploitation, low wages, and next to no benefits and job protections. To make clear that he supports this agenda, Trudeau promptly announced after last month's election that Freeland, a darling of the financial and corporate elite for her hawkish fiscal policies and virulent anti-Russia stance, will remain Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister. The aggressive class war program of big business and all its political representatives from Trudeau and Ford to Legault and Horgan is increasingly meeting with resistance from the working class. Like their counterparts in the United States, where a massive strike wave among manufacturing, healthcare, and other workers is being fueled by decades of concession contracts, and the corporate oligarchy's prioritization of profits over human lives during the pandemic, workers across Canada have waged a series of militant strikes in recent months for improvements in wages and conditions. The mass protest which swept Alberta in opposition to the Kenney government's dismantling of public health measures also revealed the broad-based hostility to the ruling elite's strategy of living with the virus. The task now is to develop this widespread opposition into an industrial and political working class counteroffensive, to overturn the ruling class's profit before lives pandemic policy, oppose rearmament and war, and fight for workers' power. A pivotal first step in this fight is the mobilization of the working class to enforce an immediate shutdown of all non-essential business activity and in-class learning with full financial compensation for all workers, as part a strategy to eliminate COVID-19 in Canada and internationally. And what's worth bringing up, and I was thinking about it the entire time I was reading this, cutting the benefits for workers does not suddenly mean they run off into these jobs. Cutting the benefits for the workers does not suddenly mean economic growth occurs. We've seen it in the United States. We have done the tests throughout the United States already where they have cut benefits for workers. Did it improve their economy? No, it tanked their economy. And why? Because people who have no money cannot spend money. And going to jobs that do not pay for basic things like rent and food also does not create economic stimulus. All you're doing if you go and get a job that doesn't even pay your rent is siphoning money into the hands of a landlord class, which is increasingly a billionaire class, that takes its wealth and ships it offshore. Cutting benefits for workers kills your economy. We have the evidence, we have the proof, and now the Liberal Party is taking a look at the evidence, shrugging and saying, oh well, we'll do it anyway. We are ruled by a capitalist death cult. They do not care that the result of this is going to be a spike in homelessness. Quite the opposite. I think it gives them joy to render workers homeless. I think it gives them joy to kill people with COVID-19. That is the reason they want COVID-19 to stay in Canada. That is the reason they want COVID-19 to stay in Canada. Because it is an effective way to kill people without actually going out and killing them. The Liberal government, the Conservative government, and increasingly the NDP are revealing that they do not care about working people in Canada. That they will happily kill you if it means more wealth for corporate power. And increasingly we're seeing that the way that the government is actually doing this is just by giving them the money. Forget about even this process of labor exploitation. Forget about any of that. They're literally just going to print the money and give it to corporate power so that they can offshore it the way that they do and the way that they have. And we keep voting for this. Why? Are we stupid? Are we just cruel? Are we malicious? The answer seems to be yes. We can 100% do better than this. And at this stage in the game, outside of striking, quitting your job, protesting, and sabotage, which are the 4 tools that we, the working class, should be using, I'll restate it. You should quit your job. If you cannot, you should be organizing strikes. If you cannot, you should be sabotaging your workplace. And you should be protesting. If you are not doing any of these things, you are a gullible rube who is happy with their exploitation and being discarded by the conservative, liberal, and now NDP alliance. Vote communist. Vote communist. If you cannot vote communist because there isn't a communist, write communist in. We have been abandoned. There's no other word to use for it. We are being abandoned by a death cult that is happy to watch us die. We have to revolt. We have no other alternative. If you've made it to this point, like, share, and subscribe. Send this around. Let people know I exist. I have Patreons down below. You can find my music, all that kind of stuff. And hey, come into the live stream, right? There's lots of people who are here in the live stream in solidarity with one another, where we're all coming together and we're crying about this. We are being abandoned by our rulers as our empire declines. Do you talk to anybody about it? How often do you talk to anybody about the reality of what that is? Come on in here and talk to me. Good luck. We're going to need it.